So, we have tonight SWOCC's own Cheryl Davies, Fred Brick, and James Fritz, who are going to talk to us today about Freud, about Vienna, about war, and about art. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Cheryl Davis.
Thank you, Dana. I invited Fred and James with me today because I took a trip to Vienna because of this man right here. And everybody recognizes him, right? Younger version and older version of Sigmund Freud. I read this book probably 6-8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I can't remember now. And throughout this book, Freud says how much he dislikes America. And I was like, oh, he didn't like the food, he didn't like the place, he didn't like the people. I was like, oh, this is terrible. And nothing can compare to his Vienna. And I thought, oh, geez. Well, someday I'm going to go to this Vienna and take a look at this wonderful city he talked about. Now, some of you may not know where Austria is, Vienna, Austria. And if you look in the middle, I can't really point, of this map, do you guys see Austria there? Yeah, and so Vienna's right there. Of course, the war that's going on right now is in Ukraine, right there. Everybody see that? So I went to Vienna last year with my husband, and there was a lot of discussion about the war. Things were going on as is. But in the summer, there was talk of people starting to conserve, energy. And so not putting on the thermostat in the winter, or not heating pools, and not doing a lot of things. So it was happening. Even then, they were talking about conserving. But life was going on as is. And so I had a great time while I was there. And I don't want to bore you with a bunch of slides of Austria, but I do want to show you what Freud saw. Now, I know this is 80 years later, but this city is just culturally laden with activities. And I want to just give you that sort of like brief little look into it. And from there, I wanted, the real reason I went was to see Freud's home and where he practiced, and the birthplace of psychoanalysis. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time there. And while we're doing that, I was really surprised at how much art played a part of Freud's life. And that's why I asked James to join me today. Because Freud, he loved to collect all these ceramic pieces from around the world. He'd go to China, he'd go to South America, he'd go to Greece, he'd go to Rome, and he'd come back with all these collections of things while he was there. So, and I think Dana has some information about that. While he was in Rome, he was fascinated with a statue, and he would go to this statue one of his trips every single day and look at it, and he didn't like the statue. So I asked James to explain that for me. He really, in his psychoanalysis, he looked at dreams, and so we, part of this journey will be looking at surrealism and how much dream interpretation and surrealism are connected. And then, of course, all the graffiti everywhere you look. There's schools on how to do graffiti in Vienna. And then, of course, one of the things, and I knew this, is the influence of war on Freud's theories. And so I've asked Fred here today to tell us a little bit about those influences, especially Fred's going to tell us a little bit about World War I. So that's what you're in for in this tour here. So why did Freud find Vienna beautiful? Well, there's lots of things here. One of them, and I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, the Danube or Danube? Danube River. Danube River goes right along the city, the city side of the city, the central part of the city. And boy, talk about activity. Now, of course, I only saw nightlife activity till 10:30 at night. I'm sure there was lots more after that, but I didn't see it. But there was dancing, there was music, there was people walking and biking and boats, and it was just filled with activity. all day long and even into the evenings. And this is, well, my husband and I took dance lessons. We are not dancing. What kind of dancing is it? Zumba or? I don't know what it is, but anyway, so there was dancing all over. You could take lessons. You took lessons from this couple. We didn't look like that. Anyway, it was fun. And again, this is all over the news. There's something like that going on. Oops. There we go. The parks, they have parks, activities, sports, like, I saw this sport where it was like soccer, but it was volleyball. I don't even know how to describe it, but there was horse trails, there was bike trails, there was walking trails, there was every sport imaginable in some of these parks. Talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Even the street lights have, acceptance of all orientations. I mean, it was just interesting to see. Government buildings. I mean, I could get into all of this. I'm just giving you a little bit of a piece of this, but the architecture was overwhelming. This is just one government building inside the city. I did go to the University of Vienna, and this is the student quad. And in this student quad, they've got these big busts of these professors who used to teach there. And in a dusty little corner, they have Freud. This dusty little corner. I've never heard of any of these other guys. And then there's this, bust of Freud right there. So it's interesting to see. The museums were architecture and the paintings were just amazing. This is Mozart, a concert area for Mozart, where he played at one time. We saw lots of good music and concerts. And of course, we went to an old building where we saw the dead Kennedys, too. And my husband was way up in the front in some mosh pit. I was like, this is after COVID. I was like, oh my God. Anyway, we survived. Sorry. There's the dead Kennedys there. And even near our Airbnb, there was just music everywhere. I was so fascinated. This was kind of I don't know if you can hear it very well, but it's kind of obtuse. Yeah, so all different types of music, not just classical. And of course, we took the train, and even the train sings. I mean, this is fascinated. I was like, even the train sings. I thought, this place is amazing. So even 80 years later, I did see a lot of great things there. And Freud loved the food here. I mean, you could get these conditories, you could get pastries everywhere. This is one of the places Mozart lived, and you could get, what are those?
What's our Kugel?
Kugel.
One of the things I found most fascinating was when you went to the art museums, you would literally go in and buy an entire tray of all the unbelievable pastries that you could ever humanly imagine. And back when I was there in 91, it was like $5, and it was just this insane amount of stuff. They really love their pastries and various different things in Europe. It's crazy.
Yes. Well, and this is a meat patty. Oh, what is that? I forget. But anyway, lots of good food. This was goulash. This is just meat and gravy. A lot of meat. This is, I don't want to make everybody hungry, but it was great. And this is a Nash market, anything you could want. They even had young people demonstrating for veganism. I can't read this sign, but I know it's vegan in there. So, can you read that, Fred?
Well, bits and pieces of it. It's been,
Yeah.
I don't know, 23 years.
So after that, I've had, 2 weeks of meat. I was there a little over 2 weeks.
Something like, we're not being vegan to live, we're doing it so that we're not slaves.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Something on that gist.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I went vegetarian. As close as I could get, it was macaroni and cheese with fried onions on top. It was so good. Anyway, so yes, I did find Vienna beautiful. There was places for bikes and people to walk, and like I said, downtown, places for horses, and cars were kind of secondary. The one other thing that I noticed too, and I'm sure this is in many parts of Eastern Europe, is that people live in apartments. You could get a studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. I did see the odd time for like $750 to $1,400 a month. That's about
Euros.
Yes, euros. Yes, euros. But these are the apartments. So the parks are really important, right? To be out in the parks. And even in Freud's time, it looks like these. The buildings look like this. So I really came to see Freud Museum, and Freud lived in the second story of one of these buildings, and he has his home on one side, and he's got his practice in the other. And it's important, this waiting room is the most important part of psychoanalysis. So people would come in the door, and there would be a waiting room. And, they'd wait for their appointment with Freud, where they would go to that famous couch in the consulting room, and then the study, he had his desk, right? So this is coming in. But this room, now, the whole museum, there's hardly any furniture except here. There's a couch. There's no furniture. Because the last year of Freud's life, he had to leave. His daughter, Anna, was pulled into the Gestapo's office and drilled. And he said, enough's enough. I'm out of here. And he took all his stuff. Anything that was left was taken by the Nazis, and it was all gone. So it's funny to go to a museum with hardly anything in it. But this is where it all happened. Wednesday nights, his peers, who are all academics and practicing doctors, would come here and at 8:30 at night and talk about their clients who had hysteria and neuroses and wandering looms, they thought at one time. And they tried to understand why there was no physical basis for their physical ailments. And this is the birthplace of the Psychoanalytic Society. It was called the Wednesday Psychological Society, but in 1908 they changed their names. So this was a room, I know it really didn't have much in it, but it has a huge amount of significance. And these are some of the works from that time. Now we go into where the study, this is all new. And it's hard to think about this. You go to the doctor, you sit face to face. But with Freud's, and what these guys talked about on Wednesday nights was, we need people to talk about what's going on with them. So we got to sit behind them so they can't look at us. So they just freely talk. So there's the chair and the couch in that study, and there is his chair there. So again, there's nothing there. You just know the couch was there. And this is the couch and the infamous chair, and where the clients would sit there and talk, and then he would interpret their dreams and all that stuff. There's his desk, and on top of his desk, he's got all these weird terracotta little trinkets, and he was kind of spiritual in a way. They represented life to him, and it had some significance because you could see those little gods from the couch. He called them old and dirty gods. This is what he looked at outside his window. I'm sure maybe it was better 80 years ago, but kind of, what did Freud stare at from his office window? It wasn't much.
Are those stables?
I think there's storage units, or maybe there's stables. I don't know where they kept the horses anyway. It'd be a small place for a horse, yeah. But that's, his clients would sit in this chair opposite his office there. And that's, the doors into his practicing room. From there, he's got all these different rooms, and this is, when he had, it's so funny, it's such a small room, and he was such a huge huge influence on society, and yet when he had jaw cancer, he had 30 operations. This is the small room he convalesced in. That was it. That's all he had, was this little room. It's just amazing. Anyway, so this is his daughter's waiting room at one time. It was her bedroom. Anna Freud became a psychoanalytic therapist herself. There was a smoking and veranda room, and again, there's nothing in there. There's a false wall between I don't know what a false wall is for. I just put that in there, but there really isn't much to see except these, signs. And this at one time was a kitchen, that's now a stairway. So the significance for me was seeing that, it sounds so funny, just the waiting room, that's where it all started. So the one thing that came out of this that I was not expecting was Freud's love of art and how it influenced him. Now, I was talking to Dana. Dana, where are some of these antiquities? You collect them from all over.
From all over. There's some Chinese jade there. There's obviously some pieces that are Greek. There's a couple of African pieces that I see. There's definitely some pieces from Europe, Viking era. There's a couple of pieces from South America even. So if he wasn't traveling, he was obviously very interested in collecting from literally every archaeological event everywhere around the globe.
He had over 3,000 of these things. 3,000. He might have been a bit of a hoarder.
Well, this is specifically what white upper middle class men of Europe were expected to do in the day. You were expected to go places and then bring things back home to display your privilege, your prestige, and your wealth. This is literally what eventually becomes the modern museum, is these curiosity cabinets. We call them curio cabinets today. But these upper middle class people would have had these in their homes.
Yeah.
And they invited people over basically to show off how rich they are.
Yeah.
Is a version of this possibly the antique madness which seems to plague us today in the
absolutely. I mean, modern archaeology today has struggled to get away from just displaying exotic things for the fact that it's exotic and it's weird and it's different, to put context behind it. But back then, no, context was not needed because that wasn't the point. The point was to display your wealth and your prestige.
Well, he did. Over 3,000 pieces. So, yes, that was part of it. So, one of the things, while he was in Rome, he obsessed about this statue. It talks about it. I didn't know why he obsessed about it, and I'm wondering if you don't mind explaining, James?
I'll take a shot at it. So it's interesting that he obsessed about it, and you said he didn't like this piece ultimately, or?
He did like this piece.
He did like it,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So this is Michelangelo's Moses. It's a masterpiece of the Italian Renaissance. It's one of the 3 or 4 strongest sculptures that Michelangelo did in his early life. Michelangelo had a pretty long career. Where's the clicky thingy? Okay, so right here we're seeing Moses, and he's right at the moment where he has received the 10 Commandments from God, okay? He's up on the top of Mount Sinai, and suddenly he hears a commotion down below. The Israelites have sinned a great sin. They have made a golden calf, and they started to pray to this golden calf instead of to God. And so here's Moses up on the mountain going, what's going on here? And so that's the moment that's being captured right here. Giorgio Vasari, the great chronicler of Italian Renaissance artists, wrote about this piece and talked about all of the Jewish people who would come in every Saturday to come and look at this thing, almost in droves. So it was very popular among Jewish people living in Rome in the 16th century, and continued to this day. Many Jewish people would make a pilgrimage to see Moses. Moses is the great, patriarch of the Jewish religion. He's the prophet. He's the lawgiver. He brings, the 10 Commandments to the people, in the Ark of the Covenant and all that stuff. So here is Moses. Under his arm, his right arm over there, are 2 slender stone tablets of the 10 Commandments. In the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance, there was lots of illiteracy. People didn't know what they were looking at. So when you're an artist trying to depict a saint or a patriarch or a prophet, you had to show an attribute, something that let people know who that was, whether they could read the inscription under the thing or not. So Moses is always shown with the 10 Commandments tablets, under his arm or something like that. Let's see, does this go that way? Okay, and our friend, Dr. Freud, wrote a 30-page treatise, a little paper, just on the Moses, because he was really fascinated by it. He kind of looks at the center of the composition, the arms and the beard of Moses, and he's trying to figure out what the movement is doing, whether there's conflict being described there between the ropiness of the beard and the fingers and all that kind of stuff. He gets a little sideways in this anyway. But there are some of the drawings that go along with that piece that Sigmund Freud wrote. I like to look at the center of this piece to see just the sensuality of what's going on with Moses' arm and the interaction with the beard, because it's so sensual. And as a matter of fact, you look at Moses' arms, and I've never seen a holy man that is so ripped like this. I mean, you've got muscles, you've got muscle definition. This is a guy who's middle-aged, and he's already been running around, the Middle East for, half a century, and he's still ripped like a young man. This is just amazing. But I love the sensuality, of the fingers interacting with the beard. But everybody asks why the goat horns. Well, the goat horns are about this mistranslation of the Bible, mistranslation in Latin. The phrase was describing the radiance, the glow that was coming off of his face after he received the 10 Commandments, after he was in the audience of God. And of course, the word could also be translated as having horns on your head. So unfortunately, for the Middle Ages and the early part of the Renaissance, they were still depicting Moses with horns coming out of his head instead of as this radiant, being that had been in the presence of God. So anyway, there's that. I think the horns are not very well finished, and I think, Michelangelo would have liked somebody coming after him to maybe knock those horns off, because they were just kind of a stupid thing. And maybe he even was aware of the mistranslation, but it was a convention, so they kept it going anyway. Anyway, try to ignore the horns. What I want to concentrate on is Moses' face. They say that, Moses is this father figure, he's this patriarch, and so he's turning in anger, and we all know, this father kind of archetype that is strong and angry and full of rage, and we fear our fathers. And so I'm wondering if there was this real conflict with Freud, with his father, and that he was trying to visit the Moses character and trying to work out some of that conflict about that stuff. So what I see, though, is not just rage, because when you're enraged, yes, you have all of the muscles sticking out on your forehead, and your pupils constrict because you're really mad, but also your eyes narrow quite a bit when you're really angry. Your eyes get closed up. And I think that Michelangelo has left the eyes open a little bit and softened a little bit of the facial features on this thing to try to let us know that, yes, he has all of this power and anger and rage and all of that, but he also has compassion for his people. These are the people he led out of Egypt. These are his people. And even though they've sinned and he's angry about it and he's going to bring the wrath of God down on them, he still has compassion and love for the people. So I look for that in the little bit of softness that Michelangelo still leaves in the eyes. And since Father's Day is coming up next month. I wanted to give you this little Father's Day present so that you guys can maybe feel good about your fathers, your relationship with your father, and the patriarchs in your life. How's that? Is that good? That'll work. Okay.
I could never do that. So we did surrealism everywhere. Interpretation of Dreams was a significant book for psychoanalysis because Freud believed the road to the unconscious, or the road to understanding, was through the unconscious and wish fulfillment. And this is one of the pages from the book. Here, the nursemaid is taking care of a child. Child has to go to the bathroom. The stream gets larger and larger. A boat can, go along this stream of urine, and then all of a sudden she wakes up and realizes the child is crying. Okay, so that was an interpretation of a dream. So it's a real road to the unconscious, and then again, surrealism. And again, I think, James, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about surrealism, if you could, please.
Okay, let me give you one slide on surrealism, because even though he's the worst painter for the period, and this is it's the one thing that everybody knows. So, yes, we've got the melting watches. We've got the persistence of memory by Salvador Dali from the early 1930s. Yeah, 31. Okay, so this has all of the elements of surrealism in it. So if you've never seen surrealism before, we've got the vast featureless landscape that goes all the way out to the horizon. We've got very little in terms of foliage or anything. We've got that dead tree off to the left, and we've got that featureless cliff off to the right. And so it's just this really strange kind of open space where things can happen. And usually in surrealist paintings, strange things that are unexpected either get put together in strange combinations, or strange things happen to things as if you were dreaming about them. So we know that watches, pocket watches, are metallic things that are intricate timepieces, that are machines, and yet he's got them, melting and bending over different kinds of, draping over different kinds of things here. So those are two things that are totally, different from each other, but put together in this kind of dream kind of thing. Surrealism was all the rage in the 1920s and 30s because psychoanalysis was all the rage in the teens and 20s. It was super popular in Europe. Everybody wanted in on it. And so the artists just could not leave it alone either. It was something that they wanted to develop. And many of the leading artists, the avant-garde artists of the time, played with surrealism or became, full-fledged surrealist painters, one kind or another. We've got this strange thing in the middle that kind of looks biomorphic. It kind of looks like the skin off of somebody's face. We have a nose, an eye, another eyelash. Some people call it a dead fish. In art history, we call this the dead fish in the middle of the thing, but it's really like this disembodied skin of a face or something that's kind of draped over that rock with a watch draped over it. We've got the other watch over on the far left side that is covered in ants, which is kind of creepy and weird, and a fly has landed on the other melted watch. Then we've got these really other strange things too, these geometric planes that just kind of jut out into space. We've got one in the foreground that the dead tree is growing out of, and then we've got another geometric plane way in the background in the upper left that kind of is reflecting the sky and the sea in its top surface, but reflects the earth on its sides. So we've got these very strange juxtapositions of things that don't make any sense, and that's kind of trying to figure out this imagery or these narratives in our dreams. What do they mean? What do they mean to us in our daily lives? And that was a very popular movement in Europe between the wars, basically.
Yeah, thank you. Some paintings that were in a museum, and you can tell sort of they're dreamlike, where these are dollies here. Hunter Wasson also took this to an extreme. He built a whole block. All the floors are uneven, and there's trees and bushes growing out of this apartment building. There's like 52 offices, or 52 apartments and 16 offices in here. And just amazing. Beautiful, really. I'm sure, almost dreamlike again. This is a big factory that was renovated. Hunter Boston's dream-like look. It's amazing, isn't it? Anyway, and the other thing I noticed everywhere we went, graffiti. Graffiti classes you can take. I don't even know what this is. I thought it was beautiful, but I don't know what it is. I don't know what this is. Again, I thought it was really good looking. There's art. There's everywhere along the Danube. Danube, thank you. I keep wanting to say that. Rock sculptures. That one's definitely Freudian. So everybody can see that, right? Okay. And this, it looks like a pizza oven. I don't know. Somebody was working on it. Where we went to see the dead Kennedys, like this is great for windows. There's a cat, there's, spider web, and just really pretty art everywhere you looked. These were used for gardens to plant plants. This is definitely just Freudian. I don't know. A boudoir. And then that was a furniture shop, really. That's a plastic chair in front of us. But definitely Freudian. I don't know if we get away with that here, but the other thing that I noticed everywhere, and this is where I'm asking Fred to come in here soon, is that the war was real here. Can everybody read that? I don't want to say that out loud, but it's the F word. Can everybody see that? That's a museum of modern art. Yeah. It was very much on the people's mind. Gosh, I thought that was Hitler. It isn't. Just found that out, right? Everybody recognize that person? Yeah. Yeah, they're not happy. Again, this is in German, but they're looking at the state as a criminal organization. Notice that little A there? I didn't really recognize that at first, but here's our Airbnb. And a prominent painting in our Airbnb has, is that anarchy? Is that the sign for anarchy? It's got an A and then a circle. My husband was the one who looked at it and he said, Cheryl, I think that's the sign for anarchy. It's just done in a surrealistic way. But, anarchy, basically, it's a Greek, it means without ruler, and the circle is standing for an organization. So I was like, whoa, our bed's there, our chairs, we're all looking at the sign in our Airbnb. These were all over. No cops, no Nazis. They lived through fascism. They were serious. These plates were all over the main city. They showed homes where Jewish people lived, plaques that they memorialized some people in. This was a park near one of our Airbnbs. They had a couple of these towers. This one was the biggest one. And maybe Fred can tell us more about that.
It's basically a water tower that they used during the war to emplace anti-aircraft guns. To me, it looks like a water tower that they just converted to that usage.
Yeah, it took 6 years. Slave labor to build it, and then the war ended soon thereafter. And on there you can see graffiti again. It says "Never Again," and it's got a fence around it, but it's just left. He lived through World War I. Yes. I know you've got some slides on that. He had 2 sons in the war. He wrote twin essays, and he really believed that, we cultured people could be aggressive and ugly. And he wrote that in these 2 essays. There's his 2 sons. He followed the war very, very closely, that first war, because he was worried, obviously, about his sons. This was a calendar he kept the days with. It was a war calendar. So he lived through both wars. Well, he didn't live through the second one.
A month of the Second World War before he passed away.
Yeah. So Einstein. Between Freud and Einstein, they wrote 20 letters. They met once. In one letter that Einstein wrote in 1932, he asked Freud, is there any way of delivering mankind from the menace of war? And so Freud promptly replies in 1933, and says, whatever makes for cultural development is working also against war. In other words, you see social psych here. In-group, out-group, my culture is better than your culture, so I'm going to overtake your culture so you can see what's better. No.
So the answer is no, in some ways.
Yeah, it's very pessimistic. My culture is beautiful. Everybody should like it, right? This is Freud's diary. 1938, he left soon after that. That's when his daughter went into the Gestapo, and that was enough for him. And they came through Vienna. And there was, even along his building, I saw one picture, I didn't take a picture of it though, all these Nazi flags outside his apartment. He died in England, 1938. He was given morphine. He was in a lot of pain, and he soon died thereafter. In 1939, excuse me. These are his sisters. That's his original family. He got his immediate family out, but he couldn't get his sisters out. So his sisters were still left in that apartment. They couldn't pay the taxes. They had to leave. They ended up somewhere else. And then eventually they just died or gassed.
They were all taken to concentration camps and killed.
Yeah.
Yes, all four of his sisters.
Gross. Anyway, so that's in the apartment. I found this interesting. During the war, 76, it's not a big apartment. 76 Jewish men and women were living in that place for years. 76. It was incredible. And this is his daughter, Anna. She did not come back to Vienna until 1971 when they had the inauguration of the museum. She would not come back. So, and really, I think, Fred, I'll let you come up here, and then I can end on this a little later here. But let me get you up here. There you go.
Just pirated a slide or two from a few other things that I worked on, but I kind of went with this in two different directions because there's a part of me, and the few of you here that are from my classes understand that for me, a lot of it is backstory. To truly understand war, you have to understand the leading edge of things that build up to it. Some of you have watched entire movie sequences that are 9 or 10 or what are we on, Fast and Furious 10 now? If you jump in at 9, you have no clue what's going on in any of this, okay? And it's similar with war. I mean, I could spend hours and hours, and this is one of the things I really was frustrated and worried about actually sitting as I was trying to pare this down. I was whining about this to my class today, and actually, how do I pare down, as I said in my class today, survey courses are basically cliff notes of this massive amount of time. And now you want me to do a 10-minute cliff note of a cliff note of a cliff note of a cliff note. But there's a couple of things I really want to get across. The atmosphere in Europe leading up to the time when Freud does all of his amazing work is similar, I would argue, in some ways to maybe the 1960s and 70s in the United States. Civil rights movement, all of the voting rights movement, all this crazy change that came about during Vietnam, Watergate, and all this stuff. Europe was this cauldron of change, which starts in some ways with the French Revolution, 1789 to about 1815. The French, for a variety of different reasons, which that's another whole class, really wanted, there was a lot of people in France who were very upset with the way the power structure was set up in said country at the time. The wealthy aristocrats dominate and control while the poor do all the work. And by the way, the wealthy aristocrats paid no taxes while the poor paid all the taxes. So there was a desire for change. When the French had their revolution, they also explored it because Napoleon in France conquered much of Europe and bring these ideas around. A lot of people were conquered by the French and had ideas thrust upon them by the French. But some of those ideas, which we symbolize as liberalism and nationalism, were actually really good ideas. Liberalism at that point encompassed freedom, equality, everyone having a participatory role in government, everyone, even the poor. As well as things like merit over birth, that you should advance in life because of what you do, not because of who your parents were. So this is something that's a revolutionary idea, which is really tearing away at the old system of how Europe did everything, the pre-existing structures. Nationalism, it's obvious. Cheryl was just talking about it. Pride in one's country, pride in one's culture, pride in what people do for themselves. But you've got all these other challenges that Europe is also going through in the 1800s or slightly before that. An industrial revolution, which changes the way manufacturing works, which works along with another thing called urbanization, because when people moved out of farms and no longer had to farm because of mechanization and agriculture, they moved to cities to work in factories and completely changed their lives. Now, if I were to sit down and ask you about the joys of industrialization, some of you would probably not come up with much, because it's dirty, awful factories, it's Charles Dickens novels of little kids eating porridge and crap like that. These are the types of things that are also transforming and changing Europe. You can move on to the expansion of science and, in some ways, the decline of religion. I could take you back to the Protestant Revolution and we could tear Christianity up, but we don't have time. The point is if you're willing to change the way that you look at a fundamental religion in your life, are you maybe really interested in maybe looking at changing other things fundamental in the way that you look at the world? If you're willing to make that big of a jump. But society is also moving away from religion as that be-all and end-all of many people's existence. I'm 59 years old. I watched my whole society, my country, in my lifetime, really become less religious and more secular. I grew up in a Catholic church, in a Catholic faith, and there was so much going on. But religion today is still prominent, but not like it was when I was a kid. Maybe that was my small town southern Minnesota upbringing, but there's a change there that's taking place. Modern prosperous world, belief, and this is something that comes in the 1800s, we can figure this out. We can solve these problems. Science can help us do it. People working together and thinking, we can solve every problem. We can conquer every issue through reason and logic and less about religion and faith and belief in these things. So these are all things that are changing during this time period. Understanding the path of human development. You had all these wonderful people who came along with their theories of how the world worked, be it Marx, be it Auguste Comte, and other people who said everything's always getting a little bit better. Society is improving. It's a step-by-step evolutionary process to the better. Although I look at some of the television that's out there today, and I doubt we really are making that evolutionary progress to the better in some ways. But this is what they were steeped with, that everything can change for the better. This prosperity and growth, you and most people in the United States expect that their lives will be better possibly than their parents were. There's this stepping stone forward, always getting better. Not everybody moves up forward. While a great deal of society may move forward, not everyone does. And that's also what industrialization isn't helping with, always. So, health reform, home reform, all these different things that people are doing. And that just also gets us into art. I've got some art I'm going to throw in this because I got challenged. And lastly, have any of you ever heard of the phrase Victorianism? Europe in the middle of the 1800s was torn between a bunch of people who really want to change because of revolutions. There's lots of revolutions, industrial, scientific, and all that. But there's also this moralistic society that Queen Victoria was supposed to be the part of, that was prim and proper and everything was great. And nobody had extramarital affairs, and there are no kids born of it. And it's all BS, guys. They were doing things they weren't supposed to be doing. But the goal was what? And once again, growing up in the United States in the 60s and 70s, I saw very similar situations. Morality, but a lot of that's challenged in the 60s. So I see parallels there. Let me throw some pictures at you because maps and pictures are always useful. Well, I've never used one of these clickers. Speaking of Vienna, there you go. 1873. And you know what's really funny is I was there in 1991. And I can point, if I had a laser, I could show you where I lived for 2 months. And I could show you where I walked through the big church in the middle, St. Stephen's Dome, because it's not that different. When they want to fix a building here, when they want to change and remodel, they leave the outside structure of the building, the walls. They just gut the interior because they've got to use the same footprint because all the buildings are right next to each other. So it really hasn't changed that much. The roads are the same. It really hasn't changed. You can go there and you will see something that's not that far removed from this. Sorry, I'm not very good at this. Modernization. I showed this in my class. What's this young little girl about to be given? A vaccination to protect her from some disease. And everyone in the room is freaking out because it's like 1835 and nobody's got a But this is progress. We can fix and save ourselves from things. Yes, we can go in the early hand-cart subway system of London as progress takes us forward. Or we can maybe not so much move much further. Anyone know what this is? In the 1860s, Roman Catholic Church, so worried about their role in society and life and how it was being torn down and religion was being pushed down because of science and ideas, the Pope came up with a book called The Syllabus of Errors. This is all the stuff the scientific people get wrong, including that evil Galileo who thinks the Earth is the center of our solar, isn't the center of our solar system, excuse me. So this is the book you were supposed to read and buy into, because the church really didn't want you to accept science. So there's still a denial of many things in a way. But yes, naturalistic art of the time, realistic art of the time. It's not all happy, upbeat. It's gloomy. As well as, here's a job for you. You've just harvested the farm field. What are these women doing? They're gathering wheat seeds. They're called gleaners. Why? Because the machinery didn't get everything. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of food laying in that farm field. And what, a year from now when you reharvest again? Well, what if you run out of food and there's all that stuff you left laying there? These gleaners literally went around and would pick bags of grain up that might get them through starvation at the end of the next year. Simple things. Or here's the guys that had to pull the boat in. Realistic viewpoints of the world at the time. Now, some of them weren't so realistic viewpoints. I like to point at modern art that I don't understand, because I don't understand it. Give me a landscape. I get that stuff. Now, there's a whole bunch of people who are very excited and get the mindset and the open-mindedness going before Freud rolls around. Now, I can sit back and talk about Charles Lyell and how he looked at the planet and said, there's no way this baby's 6,000 years old. The whole Bible thing, it ain't working for me. I'm seeing pictures of this Grand Canyon thing. I'm like, no. You can't carve that in 6,000 years. And he's challenging the old preconceived notions. Well, who really knocked it out of the park? It's Charles Darwin. Sadly, in some ways, Charles Darwin is one of the most misunderstood and misinterpreted people of his time period. Because once again, he threw out theoretical ideas about how, A, animals evolved and changed over time, natural selection, survival of the fittest. But more importantly, a possible theory of how the human species evolved over time. And most of us today are obviously very happy with the theory, and it makes sense. And we've got lots of data that proves all of this, or we believe proves all of this. But sadly for, I would argue, Darwin, people come along and do what with his theories? Make them say what they want to say. And in my Western Civ class, in particular, in other classes, I talk about hundreds of Europeans were going into African countries and conquering them during this time period, from 1850 until about 1914. It's called the Scramble for Africa. 100 British soldiers would defeat 1,000 Zulu warriors. At the end of the day, 100 guys beat 1,000. And at the end, yes, they've got modern weaponry, and these guys don't. But what other conclusion did they draw at the end of the day for why they were so successful in what they did? Yeah, I'm a white European dude, and you're an African guy, and you're lesser than we are. Because that's the conclusion that they thought obviously was flowing from 1,000 guys beating 100 guys. There's a lot of other reasons for this. But social Darwinism, take Darwin's theories, which apply theoretically maybe to humans, but then you throw race into the mix. And it's not just race, folks. There's other things that came along with this. Obviously, we can have a little fun with Darwin. We could have a lot of fun with imperialism and Europeans going into Africa to save the poor, starving people of Africa and make themselves feel really good about this stuff. Well, I didn't get to Einstein yet, but I'm trying to jump into, it's a little bit later in all this. The massive number of African countries that are carved up by the Europeans. In 1850, a small number of states along the periphery were controlled. By 1914, all of Europe has fallen under European control except Liberia and Ethiopia. Now, a small-minded European who already thinks in, white superiority is going to draw what conclusion from looking at that? We rock. And I'm sorry, that's the conclusion they drew. I don't like it, but that's the conclusion they drew. Let me go back to where I was. Because there's other things that fit into this. You've got all these great people. Listerine. You guys know what Listerine is. You guys know how horrible Listerine tasted in the day. No one would use that stuff now. It's disgusting. But it killed the germs in your mouth. The concepts that science was giving us answers to. Why these bad things happen to us. To think the earlier stuff about how we can make a positive, better world for ourselves. Changing role for women. This is another thing Europe is coming to terms with. In some cases, a little bit earlier, or a lot earlier than the United States did here. But on one hand, you had women living in poverty and working in factories in this industrial world, and some of them were still farmers. And their lives are not changing that much. On the other hand, you have the middle class and upper middle class, the cult of domesticity, the stay-at-home person who took care of the kids and lived a very comfortable life. Some of these women received education, but what kind of education did they get? Not only did they might learn a little math, but they learned dance, and they learned the teacup, and they learned which salad fork to use, because it fit into the societal expectations of the time. So all of this stuff kind of fits into an atmosphere. Oh, by the way, this is a suffragette who is protesting against not being allowed to vote. She was in prison, and she went on a hunger strike, so they force-fed her, so she wouldn't die and become a martyr to the cause of women getting the right to vote in England. So there's a lot going on here. Factory workers. This is a drawing. This photography wasn't quite there yet. And this is actually a pretty nice factory compared to the stuff that people go through. Now, why I spent all this time with this is you eventually get into a massively insane period leading up to World War I. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why this war took place. I'm not going to spend all the time going into them. But there's some of them that I think you really need to understand. First one, there hadn't been a war in 100 years. I'm not an advocate for war, but why was that a bad thing?
People didn't know what to do.
Are there a lot of veterans wandering around without arms and legs to show the 18-year-old men who are full of testosterone what happens when they go to war? No. And 18-year-old men believe they're harmless, unharmable, nothing will ever hurt them, and they're idiots. But the point is war is destructive and people get killed and it's terrible. If you haven't had war, you don't get what it's going to do to you. You don't understand the consequences of it. And on top of that, you have militarism. Countries in Europe were arming to the teeth, and they were creating war plans that were so massively intricate that once you started the process, you couldn't stop it. It's called the Schlieffen Plan, the invasion that took place there into France from Germany. But the fact that you had all this stuff and all this equipment and all this planning and all these ideas dovetails with nationalism, because there were lots of people in Europe who didn't like each other for thousands and thousands of years. And it doesn't go away. Today in class, I joke with my students about how the Europeans express national pride now, safely and effectively. Soccer games. Until the team loses, then they beat the crap out of each other, okay? They get all worked up and upset. This used to be the Olympics used to be this way. This is another way we can prove it. Have you seen the medal count things at the Olympics? The Americans have 105 and the Russians have 100. Yeah, I remember that when I was a kid. Gotta get more medals in those commies. Gotta get more medals in those commies. But all of these types of things. Working together to raise the level of tension amongst these people. I told you how they carved Africa up. They were fighting over scraps and pieces of Africa, raising the level of tension between these countries. And then all the intricate details getting us to the actual war. But World War I, the division of Europe into these sides. So Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, where Freud lived in Vienna in Austria, as well as a few other smaller countries, facing off against the French, the British, and the Russians. You're saying to yourself, Mr. Brick, you forgot the United States. We don't get into war until the very end, almost last year. We don't get involved until we're desperately needed to save the British and the French, and whatever, we can get all patriotic. But the point is that these people willingly went to the war by the hundreds and thousands and eventually millions at the beginning of the war, and they died like crazy. Watch Dunkirk. Watch any World War I film of the trenches. There's a boatload of them over the past 10 years. Why? 100-year anniversary. 1914, 1918. A lot of movies came out. And you can see the insanity of what it was. And this has an impact on the world after the war. This has an impact on people like Freud, who had sons, like Cheryl said. But you also had all these soldiers returning during the war and after the war who were what? Messed up by what they had seen, what they had gone through, the people around them that had died, the stuff they had to do to other human beings to survive in that situation. This, in some ways, transforms psychoanalytic thought as well, because there were a lot of psychoanalysts who were very much interested in dreams and trauma in childhood, which led you to become X, Y, and Z. Well, here's a whole bunch more trauma we can deal with. How is that going to manifest itself in all these people coming back from war? I mean, Freud, the economy, I was reading this today, the economy in Austria was in such bad shape after World War I that his pension and all, he didn't have any money. He had to see 20 clients a day because he had to make money to afford where he was living and what he was doing. Well, he had 20 clients because there were plenty of really screwed up people after World War I. And not just the soldiers, but the moms, the dads, and others who had lost family members. So the need for this seemed so much more expansive after the war because, once again, we had created an atmosphere where people were willing to and were interested in looking at, why am I the way I am? Why do I feel the way I am? In the past, that was all stuff that was internalized, but Freud and all these others that came before him opened the doorway to us being much more questioning people, thinking about all these things. I know. Imperialism wasn't just a European. Colonialism wasn't just a European thing, folks. This is a nice little shot of Uncle Sam telling the people of Latin and South America who we were screwing around with to get in line and do what we tell you to do. Or once again, India. The conquest of India by the British and how they used it. And it's not just about, I'm glad I got to this one. It's not just about race and white Europeans conquering people of color. It was also about rich white Europeans using the poorer white Europeans. It wasn't just about race. It was also about socioeconomics. Okay? Anyway, too much. There's always too much. Anyway, she threw the hook at me, so I gotta let her get to her end.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Thank you very much, both of you and everybody for coming today. I definitely appreciated Freud had an influence on all of us today. We're lucky. We know what we do today, and the way we treat mental illness today has a lot to do with how Freud opened our minds. And actually, at his his funeral, someone had said, each of us would think, judge, feel more narrowly, less freely, less justly without his thinking ahead of us, without this powerful inward stimulus he's given us. So thank you very much. And you're free to go. If anybody has any questions, you can ask us.
If you were just here for the extra credit and you didn't sign in, remember it's right up here.
I have all the